Gotham.
Hello, is this thing on? There we go. My name is Rick Weidman. I'm a broken down former medic, Vietnam vet. Served with the Maricao Division 196 Light Infantry Brigade in Vietnam. We did have, in fact, burn barrels, and we didn't call them burn pits, but we had dumps and sumps that we set on fire quite regularly so that there would be nothing of use left to the Viet Cong and the other insurgents. Finally, the card that Bernie Edelman, one of my colleagues, passed out, it only has one small entry of hazardous exposure, and it says burn pit fires. It is the most ubiquitous toxin that was exposed of all the folks who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, I might add, have been exposed to. And the deleterious health effects are just extraordinary and debilitating to veterans who inhale this stuff time and time again. The VA has been incredibly slow in terms of responding to this environmental disaster, and it is a disaster, because it affects tens of thousands, if indeed not hundreds of thousands of veterans. And it is, 2 years ago, I was testifying before the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and one of the members of the panel said, "Mr. Weidman, have we learned the lessons of Vietnam?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'm not known for being taciturn." So he said, "Is that all? No?" And I said, "Well, no, sir." And so he said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "We've not learned a damn thing. We knew what to do. We knew that burn pits early on were a terrific problem for those serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. We knew early on that there was tremendous problems. The more you expose people to hostile fire, the greater the PTSD is going to manifest. Eventually, all but about 2% are going to posit PTSD. But the more important and more insidious of those two is the burn pits and the toxins to which people were exposed. And because there was a multiplicity of toxins from those burn pits, there is a multiplicity of symptoms that makes it hard to pin down. That does not make it any less real. And it is time that we unite as a veterans community to do right by these young people. VBA's founding principle is never again shall one generation of American veterans abandon another. And we'll be damned if we'll abandon a young generation like we were abandoned when we came home. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to yield to the folks who have the most expertise on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us.
What he's saying is listen up, people.
Our mascot has a few words for
It's when we clap. So
Well, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Elizabeth Beavers. I am Senior Campaigner for Security with Human Rights at the U.S. section of Amnesty International. Amnesty is honored to join today with our partners at Burn Pits 360 and grateful to our friends at the Vietnam Veterans of America for their support of this event. We're grateful also for the leadership of our veteran service organization partners more broadly on this crucial issue. We'd also like to thank Senator Klobuchar, Congressman Castro, Congressman Kaufman, and Congresswoman Esty for co-sponsoring this event and for their leadership on this work. We're here today because tens of thousands of veterans, active service members, and civilians were exposed to harmful emissions after breathing in toxins produced by open-air burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. The U.S. military, as well as private contractors such as Kellogg, Brown, and Root, known as KBR, built and operated these open-air burn pits to dispose of waste. It's been estimated that large bases produce 60,000 to 85,000 pounds of solid waste per day at least. Materials burned in the pits include jet fuel, plastics, batteries, dead animals, human body parts, expired pharmaceutical drugs, and paints and solvents. Further, reports indicate that in some cases the pits were built on top of soil that was contaminated by chemical war agents. After exposure to the thick plumes of smoke produced by these burn pits, veterans have displayed devastating health conditions, including neurological disorders, rare forms of cancer, reduced lung function, and pulmonary diseases. Additionally, Amnesty International remains deeply concerned about the local Afghan and Iraqi populations exposed to the burn pits as well. According to some reports, nearby civilian populations appear to suffer similar health consequences, including birth defects and neurological disorders in children. This crisis implicates both domestic and international law. In the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2010, Congress directed the military to cease the use of burn pits except in narrow circumstances. Under international human rights law, governments have an obligation to protect people's lives and their health. That includes the U.S. government with respect to protecting the life and health of veterans and civilians exposed to burn pit emissions. The United States ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, in 1992. The ICCPR recognizes that every human being has an inherent right to life, including a right to be free from arbitrary deprivation of life. Toxic exposures threaten that right to life. In addition to the right to live, the human right to health is enshrined in numerous international and regional human rights instruments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which the U.S. signed in 1979, imposes on governments an obligation to ensure conditions for people to be as healthy as possible, including through preventive measures and access to timely care. Amnesty International joins with our partners to urge Congress to address this crisis, hold public hearings investigating the impacts of burn pits and toxic exposures, support legislative efforts to provide affected service members with specialized health care and benefits, publicly call on the Department of Veteran Affairs to recognize the service connection of these devastating health consequences, acknowledge the harm suffered by local civilians on the ground. We are honored to be joined by this expert panel today to explain in more detail the urgency for Congress to act. I'll introduce them each and then they'll share remarks. Later there will be an opportunity for audience follow-up questions. So first up I want to introduce Mr. Will Thompson. Retired Staff Sergeant Will Thompson served 23 years in the Army and the West Virginia Army National Guard. During his second deployment to Iraq in 2009 to 2010, he developed a pulmonary fibrosis and hypersensitivity pneumonitis from inhaling toxins from the burn pits and toxic dust and irritants from the environment. After his deployment and diagnosis, he spent months at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in the Warrior Transition Unit. His lung function steadily declined despite treatment, and he ultimately ended up on 10 liters of oxygen and a patient at Inova Fairfax Hospital in Fairfax, Virginia, waiting on a lung transplant for survival. He received a double lung transplant on June 6, 2012. Unfortunately, his donated organs rejected, and he received another double lung transplant on March 9, 2016. Currently, his health is better, but he continues to have lung infections and acute periods of lung rejection. Each day is a battle that he continues to fight. Will, we're honored to have you here today.
I had to write this down to keep it to 5 minutes, because I could talk about this all day long. My name is retired Staff Sergeant William Joseph Thompson. I served 23 years, 3 months, 11 days in the United States Army and the West Virginia Army National Guard. I have deployed twice with the West Virginia Army National Guard to Iraq. During my last deployment, I was stationed at Camp Stryker on the Victory Complex. My symptoms of frequent coughing started September 2009 while in Iraq. I was treated for allergies by my doctors and PAs. I returned to Fort Stewart, Georgia, and after I mentioned to the doctors that I had been having frequent cough, they did a chest x-ray that revealed bilateral pneumonia. They treated me with an antibiotic and sent me home to West Virginia to follow up with my PCP in 1 week. After a week, I followed up with my doctor, Dr. Remines, and after a CAT scan, he discovered that I had pulmonary fibrosis with pulmonary nodules. He stated my lungs looked like an 80-year-old coal miner's lungs. He referred me to Walter Reed Army Medical Center where I was treated by Dr. Jacob Collins for 6 months. He admitted me to the Warrior Transition Unit at Walter Reed, and after 6 months of testing, which included an open lung biopsy, I was informed that I had titanium, magnesium, iron, and silica in my lungs. They diagnosed me with hypersensitivity pneumonitis and pulmonary fibrosis. At that time, my case was so unique to them that they called me a question mark. Because my lung disease was chronic, I was referred to a Nova Fairfax Hospital transplant clinic by Walter Reed and was told that most likely I would need a lung transplant in the future. I have been seen by a Nova Fairfax transplant clinic from February 2011 to this present time. During this time, I've been on oxygen as high as 10 liters oxygen continuously, and on June 6, 2012, I received a double lung transplant and started pulmonary rehab. The first year was a good year. I took all the precautions and followed all the doctor's orders. Despite this, over the next 3 years, I went through a period of lung rejection and infection and decreased oxygen level. I was back on oxygen again, and on March 9, 2016, I underwent my second double lung transplant. My life and my family's life have changed since I returned home from deployment in 2010. Due to my low immune system now, I have to wear a mask in highly populated areas to prevent infection. I challenge you to go into a store wearing a mask, like the one I have on right now, and see how people treat you. I've been treated like I was contagious, and I've had to explain many times that it was for my protection. And with that, it's even hard to hang out with my kids during the day when they say, "Daddy, can we do this?" And I say, "No, we can't do that." Or, "Daddy, let's go skiing." I can't do that. "Daddy, let's go swimming." Can't do that. "Daddy, can I have a piggyback ride?" I can't do that. "Daddy, let's go to the beach." I can't do that. I can't do that because of bacteria in the water that my immune system will not fight off, the tools will. I can't go out in the sun for too long because my medication and the sun exposure with my medication is prone to give me skin cancers, which I've had 3 removed recently. I don't feel like a man because my role as a husband has been taken over by my wife. She now does everything that I used to do. There's so many things I can no longer do. I am a warrior of the United States of America. I gave my lungs for my country. The toxins in the air from burnt pits and toxic dust in Iraq has changed my life forever. I will never be the way I used to be. Now, I am glad to be alive when so many did not get that opportunity and chance when they come home, or if they got to come home. I've heard so many times from the VA, "Well, we don't know how to treat you. You don't qualify to fit into our parameters for benefits." I've been denied TSGLI because the Army does not think having a lung transplant is a traumatic event. I have been denied housing adaptation 3 times by the VA because I was not dismembered or I do not meet qualifications. I was told the last time that I was denied that I did not have enough evidence to show that I needed assistance. Luckily, we found groups like Super 5 Fund and America Fund who provided funds to help make my bathroom handicap accessible. This is when I was in a wheelchair. My injuries are different from other more common injuries that occur in Iraq and Afghanistan. It took the VA 3 years to provide me with an air purifier in my home to keep me free from allergens and dust. They also denied helping remove carpet from my house that was instructed by the doctors, so we had to pay for this ourselves. We have also taken out loans to build a gym and a workout area in my house to continue my pulmonary rehab during times of when I'm ill with infections that I cannot go into pulmonary rehab and infect anybody else, or when times the cold and flu system are at their peak. Although I was 100% service connected through the Army and the VA, I do not qualify to receive my retirement until age 60 because my injuries were not combat related. I may not live to be 60. The average year lifespan after a lung transplant, I was informed, was 5 years. Every day is a battle for me. I continue to fight. I still have to battle infections and try to keep my body healthy from lung rejection. Hopefully, after hearing my story, it will bring awareness not only for me, but for other veterans who are battling the same VA system that still does not recognize injuries related to burn or pit exposures and toxic dust from Iraq and Afghanistan. Thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Thank you, Will. And we're honored to be joined by one of the members of Congress for sponsoring this event. I want to make sure to welcome Mr. Congressman Castro to the front here. and let him say a few words. Mr. Castro has been a very vocal supporter of this work and has really led in drawing awareness for his constituents and for others who are suffering because of burn pits. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'll give brief remarks because I know they didn't come to hear me, but I want to say thank you to Rosie Torres and Elizabeth Beavers, everybody at Burn Pits 360 and Amnesty International, and all of the panelists here today, helping shed light on this issue for folks in Washington, D.C. I represent San Antonio, Texas. It's known as Military City, USA. You can imagine that we have many veterans who served in different theaters, different time periods over the years. And I guess about a year ago, for the first time, there were folks who came to me and talked about the effect of burn pits for service members who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and the lasting and impactful health effects that being exposed to those noxious fumes has had on their health. And the United States, I believe, should stand up for veterans the same way they stood up for us when they were active duty service members. And most of all, I want to make sure that this doesn't become another case of Agent Orange, where for years we denied that our veterans were suffering from health ailments because of what they were exposed to in Vietnam. A few years ago, the burn pit registry was established that now has, I believe, about 113,000 people who have signed up for it, who believe that they are being affected, and many of whom doctors have said they're being affected by what they were exposed to in Iraq or Afghanistan. But the VA also estimates that there are 3 million people who could qualify to be on that registry. And so I most of all wanted to come here and be a sponsor of this event. We have both Democratic and Republican sponsors because this is not a partisan issue. To say that we're here to help in any way that we can with support, with legislation, with resources, but at this time, most of all, to make sure that every member of Congress in the Senate and the House knows about this issue. Because I believe that there's still many people who don't realize that this was a problem, that this happened. So thank you, especially to the members of the staff members of Congress who are here. I hope that you'll take this back to your office and make sure that the other people in your office and your member of Congress the people in your office that work on this issue and the member of Congress knows about the importance of this issue. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Congressman. I want to next open up the floor for Dr. Alan Harris. Dr. Harris is an assistant professor of medicine at the G.V. Sonny Montgomery VA Medical Center. She is subspecialty trained in pulmonary and critical care medicine and has a special interest in constrictive bronchiolitis affecting the veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. She has spoken nationally and internationally on lung disease in veterans and has served as an advisor to the American Thoracic Society and members of Congress on policy related to the long-term health consequences of exposure to burn pit emissions in military personnel. Dr. Harris?
Hi, thank you for inviting me to be here. Like she said, my name is Alan Harris. I work at the VA Medical Center in Jackson, Mississippi. I've been there as a pulmonologist for the last 5 years and have a dedicated clinic to taking care of lung issues in veterans from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Currently, I take care of about 200 patients with lung disease that I believe is related to burn pit or dust, some kind of inhalation exposure that they experienced while deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mostly I see a slightly different disease than what Will is describing that he has. Constrictive bronchiolitis is the most common, far and away the most common thing that I see, which is a disease of the small airways. So itis at the end of anything in medicine means inflammation, arthritis, tonsillitis. So bronchiolitis is inflammation of the bronchioles, which are the smallest airways that lead into the air sac. Constrictive just means they're squeezed by inflammatory tissue, smooth muscle that shouldn't be there, and that causes difficulty breathing. So the symptom that patients present with is shortness of breath, doing activity that they could do before, and now they're no longer able to do because of shortness of breath. Some people I see early where They were, they're still active in the National Guard. They still have to do their physical fitness test, which includes a 2-mile run for the Army. Other branches, slightly different run distance, but regardless. And they say, this used to be no problem. I used to could knock this out in 12 minutes, and now I'm training harder than ever, and it's all I can do to finish, or I had to go on walk protocol because I can't finish. What's going on? Some people I see later where they're having trouble getting around their house because of shortness of breath. Some people have a dry cough, and that's not always there, but it can be. But shortness of breath is ubiquitous in that. One of the challenges of some patients, it takes a while to get to a pulmonologist because one of the challenges of this disease is you can't make the diagnosis without a biopsy. And so patients go to primary care and explain their symptoms, and the normal tests are ordered, imaging, pulmonary function tests, and those can all be normal, but the disease is there and only evident by biopsy. I biopsied about 10% of the 200 and have found, in all of the biopsies that we've gotten, have found constrictive bronchiolitis. The reason we haven't done biopsies on the other 90%, it has been patient preference because right now there's not a treatment. So patients say, so you're gonna put me through a surgery and then what? And that's a totally valid point, and I say, you're right, so that, they make the choice that, well, this isn't really gonna change anything right now, so that's why we haven't done the biopsies, but we continue to follow the patients, and clinically, there's nothing else going on, and I'm convinced clinically that they do have constrictive bronchiolitis that we would find if we did a biopsy. One of the things that I hear sometimes from the medical community, and the benefit side, is smoking. So over half of the patients that I take care of have never smoked a cigarette in their life. The others that have very short smoking histories. They smoked for a year or a few years. And while smoking doesn't help anything, nobody should smoke. I don't think this is the cause at all. And we have a control group. We have the Vietnam generation. So these were healthy young men, many of whom were smokers, and now we take care of them at the VA in their 60s with COPD and lung cancer because they've continued, many of them, not all Vietnam veterans, but the ones that have continued to smoke, that's the diseases that they're presenting with now. That's what smoking does. If smoking for a year or two caused constrictive bronchiolitis, then we would know about that in the pulmonary community because of smokers, whether they're in the military or not. So the challenge is once a diagnosis is established right now, the things that as members of Congress that we need your help and can make the biggest impact on veterans is right now there's not a treatment, and to find treatment there needs to be research, and research costs money. There are no specific funding, there is no specific funding right now that I'm aware of for this problem. There is DoD funding available for Gulf War, but that's very specific for the first Gulf War, the 90, 91, 92 time. And this disease haven't seen in that generation of veterans. So this is proposing a project to look for treatment in this particular group doesn't qualify under that. So we're left with the avenue of general NIH funding, which is very competitive and difficult to get. So some dedicated funding to research in Iraq and Afghanistan veterans with lung disease would be very impactful. The other thing is the benefit side. So Rosie and some other people have fought for it being recognized as a condition, and what I'm being told by the senior people at the central VA office is that it is in fact recognized, and what they're telling me as a physician is that if I have diagnosed the condition and say as their physician, it is, in my opinion, more likely than not that the disease was caused by exposure during deployment, that should be granted, and that's not what I'm finding. Patients are coming back to me and saying, I'm getting denied. I had a patient last week tell me He got denied for the second time and was actually told that if he keeps appealing, that he's gonna get flagged as a troublemaker and have things taken away, which is completely unacceptable. So I think right now there's too many layers. You know, I think the central VA, the top people have recognized it, but that's not getting filtered down to the people that are actually making the decisions that have the contact with the patient. And so some help is needed there as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. I want to recognize next Dr. Robert F. Miller, who is a professor of clinical medicine at Vanderbilt University Medical Center with board certification in internal medicine, pulmonary medicine, and critical care. In 2005, Dr. Miller and colleagues began evaluating a large number of Fort Campbell soldiers with unexplained exercise limitation following deployment to Southwest Asia. They were the first group to report that their symptoms were due to constrictive bronchiolitis and linked to deployment. Dr. Miller continues to see patients with exercise limitation following deployment and has diagnosed over 100 service members with small airways disease. He has ongoing collaboration with basic scientists and clinicians from Vanderbilt, the University of Michigan, and National Jewish Health in the areas of small airway pathology, radiologic characterization of constrictive bronchiolitis, and occupational lung disease. Thank you for being here, Dr. Miller.
Well, thank you for including me in this panel. It's a real honor to be here and a real opportunity to accomplish some of the things that a lot of us have been working on for several years. So let's go back to 2003 when there was a large deployment as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. 20,000 soldiers from Fort Campbell were deployed at that time. Fort Campbell's about 40 miles from Nashville, where I work. On return, a large number had unexplained shortness of breath. So here's the typical soldier. 25 years old, an elite athlete in high school, could run 2 miles in 12 and a half minutes at the time of deployment. And when they returned, they couldn't run 2 miles without stopping, period. They were physically unfit. They were no longer deployable. They faced med boards. So Fort Campbell evaluated a number of these service members, and they couldn't figure it out. And they asked us to look at it. We did all the usual things that you would do for someone with unexplained shortness of breath: x-rays, CT scans, pulmonary function tests, exercise tests. None of them provided an explanation. And so we started doing surgical lung biopsies because we knew that surgical lung biopsies could sometimes reveal something in the lung that the other studies wouldn't detect. And that's what we found. We found that the small airways of the lungs were affected. It was a condition called constrictive bronchiolitis, like you've heard. We diagnosed several members like this. We had a large conference at National Jewish with Richard Meehan and presented our data to DOD and VA and several other members. The problem is that this is a disease that doesn't occur randomly. It's not smoking related. You don't find it in a 25-year-old. You find it in people that have some risk. And in this situation, the risk is deployment. A lot of exposures associated with deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's very clear to me that these service members have constrictive bronchiolitis on the basis of their exposures. So over time, we've seen 200 service members with unexplained shortness of breath. We have over 100 who have been biopsied and found to have constrictive bronchiolitis. The vast majority, well really all of them, are no longer deployable and have to end their military service. Most of them have difficulty finding employment because they're not physically fit to do things in the civilian world, just like they weren't ready to be deployed. They've had a tremendous difficulty getting disability benefits. The VA disability form has constrictive bronchiolitis as one of the 6 things that you might consider at the very top of the list. But because your pulmonary function tests and x-rays are normal, you don't get benefits. You rarely get benefits when you leave the Army. It's become somewhat of a political diagnosis. And So the things that I think that we need to consider here is, one, this group of diseases is deployment related. Two, we need to look at the disability rating for this group of service members, and we need to consider them as being service connected, and we need to have a rating system that will apply. We need to consider that the theater is a hazardous environment, and that we need to consider pulmonary function testing before deployment. If you look at the September 11th firefighters at the World Trade Center, they all saw deterioration in their pulmonary function tests. They were all still normal, but as a result of being at the World Trade Center site, they all saw deterioration. We know that because they were known to be exposed to toxins as part of their jobs, and they had series of pulmonary function tests to show that. So these are the kinds of things that we need to consider. And finally, we need to consider having centers of excellence, because there are too many people who provide care at military facilities that won't consider doing surgical lung biopsies. And there are a large number of people that we see that have been seen elsewhere that don't have a biopsy. So thank you very much, and I appreciate being here.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. I want to turn it over next to Dr. Meehan. Dr. Richard Meehan is a rheumatologist and professor of medicine in the Division of Rheumatology at National Jewish Health Center in Denver, Colorado. Dr. Meehan obtained his medical degree from the University of Texas Medical School at Houston and completed his internal medicine residency and rheumatology fellowship at the University of Iowa Hospital and Clinics. Dr. Meehan joined the NJH faculty in 1999. He's a retired Navy captain and served as a deployed reservist during the Gulf War as an ICU physician and in Iraq as a CB battalion surgeon in 2008. He has received numerous honors and authored numerous medical research publications, and we're glad to have him here. Dr. Meehan?
Thank you very much for allowing me to participate, and greatly appreciate all the work it took from Amnesty International, Ms. Beavers, and Torres from the Department 360 to put this on. I joined the U.S. Navy as a reserve physician in 1988 when I was doing immunology research at NASA and on the faculty at the University of Texas. About 2 years later, I deployed to the Gulf War in support of that operation and saw firsthand how novel the dust was in that part of the world. It's an ancient seabed. You try to sweep it in your berthing or your hospital and it stays in the air. So you either have to mop it up or clean it out with a vacuum. Knew that couldn't be good for healthy lungs. And then when the oil fires were ignited, it was a total eclipse of the sun. From our base over 200 miles south, you could not see where the sun was. Again, that can't be good for healthy lungs. I joined National Jewish and we started a autoimmune lung center, the first in the country, and now we see very large numbers of patients referred from all over the country that have unusual lung diseases due to autoimmune disease. And we pioneered some of the treatments for that. In 2007, I received orders to deploy to Iraq with my reserve CB battalion. And at that time, the Center for Health Promotion contacted a world-renowned occupational pulmonologist at my institution, Cecile Rose, to study what might be the negative effect of the particulate matter burn pits on deploying soldiers. And Cecile's smarter than I was, so she said, well, Rich Meehan is deploying to Iraq. He'll be glad to look at that for you. So I did the spirometries on our CBs before in theater, and I also did analysis that I shipped back to Camp Aberdeen Proving Grounds for analysis. So I was very involved in that. Our command was very supportive. They're all CBs in the construction trade, so they know this is important. Well, when I came back, I was very concerned that in fact this was a health hazard. Cecile Rose convened a distinguished panel. Bob Miller was there from Vanderbilt sharing his data. We had all the pulmonary chiefs from the major divisions and the VA there. We wrote up a white paper of how we should evaluate these patients, what the case definitions were. But more than that, the veterans needed to be thoroughly evaluated. As Dr. Miller said, the standard testing cannot pick up this disorder. So we developed a post-deployment lung health center at National Jewish due to very grateful private philanthropy from our National Jewish donors, the Sergeant Sullivan Foundation, the Schaefer Foundation in Texas. And we're able to subsequently secure some Department of Defense grants to look at the biopsies using some novel research tools, mass spectrometry, laser ablation, to find out what kind of particles might be in there relating to the airway injury that Bob Miller and his group had described. And we also wanted to find out, engage our most talented scientists at our research institute, where we have 54 pulmonologists. So I'm really comfortable on this panel. I deal with pulmonologists more than rheumatologists. But to understand the mechanism of injury. I was actually very disappointed after we've evaluated several hundred of these patients at National Jewish. I wanted to have them have my disease. I wanted this to be an autoimmune bronchiolitis, of which I see in rheumatoid arthritis and other conditions, is we can treat that with drugs. But after doing the biopsy, similar to Bob Miller's group, we found it was not appear to be autoimmune mediated, but more of an injury type of problem. So the drugs that I normally use were not very effective on these patients. They would just increase the risk of toxicity. And now we've got our group with our basic scientists trying to understand if there's non-invasive ways that we can diagnose condition, so we don't need to put patients through a VATS biopsy. But a VATS biopsy done in an institution that does this all the time is very effective. We know that the high PM particle counts that the DoD has measured in theater exceeds normal OSHA standards. You can't go work there, okay? But in a combat zone, you go where you're ordered to go. We know that there's increased incidence of asthma, even in people that couldn't go there with asthma. So the fact that the asthma rates are higher and the novel diseases that we're seeing, in addition to what Bob Miller's group has seen, we're seeing emphysema in deployers who have never smoked, and also some granulomatous changes. We're trying to understand that through research. We fully support, we've made statements to the Defense Health Board, and I mentioned this to Representative Kaufman today, that we would like spirometry done, just like we do for firefighters in the U.S. If you're going to deploy to an area where you know health hazards exceed U.S. standards, our soldiers should have that done, just like we have a hearing test every 6 months. So anyway, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all and the support from members of Congress that are giving us research resources so we can better understand and prevent this. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Dr. Meehan. So last but certainly not least, I want to turn it over to Carrie Baker. Carrie is a service-connected, combat-disabled veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Carrie served in the Marines from 1987 to 1998, where he was deployed all over the world, including the conflicts in Panama and Somalia, and the Persian Gulf War, where he served in operations Desert Shield and Storm. Carrie began his employment as a VA appellate practitioner for Chisholm and Kilpatrick in January 2013. As such, he represents disabled veterans and their dependents before the Veterans Benefits Administration and the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Prior to joining the firm, Carrie was employed by the Department of Veteran Affairs as the Chief Legislative and Policy Staff in the Veterans Benefit Administration, and with the Disabled American Veterans as Assistant National Legislative Director. Carrie, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Congressman Castro and Kaufman and Senator Klobuchar for sponsoring this event. I want to thank Burn Pits 360 and Amnesty International for their hard work to put this together. I've had the honor of working as a veterans advocate in numerous capacities for about 20 years. I've been heavily involved in issues surrounding burn pits since it really became an issue about 10 years ago. And for the last 5 years working for Chisholm and Kilpatrick, I've had the honor and the privilege of representing numerous veterans and their families affected by burn pits. Even though burn pits have been somewhat in the public eye for about 10 years, most people still don't have a proper perspective of it. The most well-known was the burn pit at Balad in Iraq. At its peak, the amount of waste burned at Balad was several hundred tons of waste per day. And the burn pit spanned approximately 20 acres at its pit and burned everything imaginable, from chemical waste to paint, solvents, styrofoam, plastics, and on and on. Air sampling at the pits detected, I should say air sampling around the bases in the pits detected extremely high levels of particulate matter, numerous polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, numerous volatile organic compounds, as well as numerous toxic organic halogenated dioxins and furans. Many of these individual chemicals are known human carcinogens, and many others are known animal carcinogens. About 7 years ago, VBA actually issued fairly decent disability claims processing policy on burn pit claims. That policy has not changed or been updated since. And I'm sad to say it has not helped. VA still undertakes unnecessary and irrelevant development of claims, fails to adhere to its own guidelines on evaluating evidence, obtains medical opinions by unqualified practitioners, and they do not track data on any of this. Without a tracking system, VA, veterans and their families, and advocates are left in the dark. We don't know how many burn pit-related claims have been submitted, how many have been denied, which medical issues are being reported. The data that has been collected is included in an indistinguishable from the data regarding Gulf War illness in the 1991 Gulf War. To grant service connection and thus compensation, VA requires a veteran to prove their disability resulting from an in-service event or injury or exposure in the case of burn pits, and that they have a medical diagnosis and that there's a medical nexus or a link between the in-service exposure and the diagnosis. Given the widespread use of burn pits, VA adjudicators are generally supposed to accept a veteran's lay statement of burn pit exposure, but in most cases that is the only thing they get right. For example, VBA staff mistake burn pit claims for Gulf War illness claims. They issue decisions denying benefits because a veteran does not have an undiagnosed illness or a medically unexplained chronic multi-symptom illness, and they never address burn pits when doing so. Understand that after the 91 Gulf War, Congress enacted laws that addressed a range of disabilities in veterans who served in Southwest Asia. Although rarely applied correctly by VA, the law provides presumptive service connection mostly for an undiagnosed illness or medically unexplained multi-symptom illness. These are complex regulations that VA has systematically failed to apply correctly. However, VA is now confusing Gulf War illness-related claims with its own policies on claims based on burn pits and post 9/11 veterans. Since I'm limited on time, I won't get into the details of the difference, except to say they are not the same. However, there are times when VA is directed to apply both sets of rules independently. Most claims ultimately get denied, however, because VA obtains an unfavorable medical opinion, sometimes from an examiner who is not qualified to provide an opinion on such a complicated subject, such as a physician assistant. The only training most C&P examiners receive on burn pit admissions is a one-page fact sheet produced by the Veterans Benefits Administration when they issued Training Letter 10-03 in 2010. However, VBA staff frequently neglect to send that fact sheet. This leaves examiners with no information at all on burn pits. Most examination reports do nothing but reveal the person conducting the examination has no experience in burn pit-related claims or are simply not aware they even exist. The status quo answer in response to requests for medical opinions is quickly becoming that VA has not found a particular veteran's disease process is caused by service in Southwest Asia. Such opinions rarely acknowledge the claim is even burn pit related, much less provide any analysis on the chemicals produced by the burn pits. I would say that it's time for VA to start learning from the past wars, but I've been saying that since post 9/11, since prior to 9/11. I don't think it's going to happen. In both Vietnam and the first Gulf War, every step towards any recognition, be it long-term health benefits, easier pathways to secure benefits such as presumptions and many other things, has been due to legislative action on the part of Congress. This generation of veterans sickened by toxins on the battlefield are already experiencing the same uphill battle as previous generations. So once again, they are trusting on Congress to act, and once again, they are running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. So this event is co-sponsored by not just Amnesty International USA, but by our friends and partners with Burn Pits 360. So I want to make sure to turn it over now to my co-moderator, Rosie Torres, who's the Executive Director of Burn Pits 360, and she's going to share a statement from Burn Pits 360 and then walk us through some questions for the panel. Rosie?
joining us today. Especially thank you to our panel for traveling so far away. Before we begin today, we extend our thoughts and prayers to Senator John McCain and his family as he is bravely battling a particularly aggressive form of brain cancer that Burn Pits 360 is all too familiar with, glioblastoma. This ruthless type of cancer has become a signature illness in veterans exposed to the dioxins found in both Agent Orange and burn pits during the Iraq and Afghanistan war conflicts. Like Senator McCain, those veterans who have battled and lost their lives to this disease are American heroes. Unlike Senator McCain, the country for which they served and ultimately sacrificed their very lives has paid little attention to the cost of their service. My name is Rosie Torres, wife of retired Captain Leroy Torres, and Executive Director of Burn Pits 360 Veterans Organization. Leroy deployed to Balad, Iraq from 2007 to 2008. Balad was home to one of the largest burn pits, which was 10 acres in size. In that pit, hazardous waste was burned 24 hours a day and doused with JPA jet fuel as the accelerant. He was diagnosed with an irreversible deployment-related lung disease, and as a result, lost both of his careers as a 14-year Texas State Trooper and 23-year United States Army soldier. Imagine returning home from war only to face a healthcare system that has failed you, an employer too afraid to understand an uncommon war injury, resulting in the end of his career, the loss of your life savings, and a denial of VA benefits. We are grateful for organizations like Troops First and Giuseppe for helping us save my husband's life and all we work for. To all members of Congress and staff, we stand before you at the capital of the greatest nation of the free world to share the impact of this toxic war that has followed us home and the effects this has had on the service members and their families. Thank you to Congressman Castro, Congressman Kaufman, and Senator Klobuchar for their leadership on this issue. We urge all Congress to carry out President Lincoln's promise to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan. It is from our personal struggle that Burn Pits 360 was born in the great state of Texas. Nearly a decade ago, we established an independent environmental health registry tracking the illnesses and deaths. Burn Pits 360 registry includes over 6,000 self-reported voluntary entries, of which over 100 are death entries made up of cancers and suicides. Burn Pits 360 is the only 501c nonprofit organization in the nation operating a private burn pit registry and advocating on behalf of veterans and their families affected by burn pit exposures. Here's what we know. The air samplings indicate the smoke contained chemicals associated with cancer, lung disease, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, leukemia, neurological disorders, and more. The devastating health conditions suffered by veterans exposed include pulmonary diseases, rare forms of cancer, and many unexplained symptoms as per Burn Pits 360 registry data. The uncertainty of the health impacts of this exposure should not circumvent the requirements needed to address these health conditions. The VA National Registry includes over 100,000 entries, which clearly underrepresents the number impacted due to insufficient outreach as well as the inability to report deaths by toxic exposure. The impact on National Guard and military, reservists, many of whom are first responders, poses a great risk to our national security. America's veterans, service members, and reservists are sick and dying and are being denied specialized health care and compensation. Their invisible wounds are often labeled as psychosomatic, resulting in a misdiagnosed terminal illness. Families of the fallen are left without death benefits. Caregivers are being denied benefits as they care for their loved ones who have lost their career due to terminal illness and debilitating health issues. Denying our servicemen and women the human rights to life and health is a repeat of Vietnam's Agent Orange delay and deny. We urge the administration and members of Congress to ensure accountability. In closing, we are most grateful for our relationship with Amnesty International USA and for their hard work in helping us create a human rights movement within the veterans community. Burn Pits 360 is driven by the moral courage to execute what is humanely right, not only in the sight of God, but also in the sight of our fellow warriors, who for some are presently ill and others that are gone but not forgotten. to open up with some questions to the panel. And I will start with Dr. Miller, Dr. Meehan. With so many active duty and veterans reporting respiratory symptoms, what clinical guidelines can VA and civilian doctors use when attempting to diagnose a war-related lung disease or injury?
You know, the Department of Defense has data that says that out of 100 soldiers that may be referred for unexplained shortness of breath, that there is no good explanation in about 40% of them. We think that a lot of those are probably the types of soldiers that we're seeing Mississippi, Vanderbilt, and National Jewish. People need to be aware that there can be something there that doesn't show up on normal testing. And you need to accept that more invasive testing may be necessary, like lung biopsies. And so I think that this is one of those things that is not on the radar for a lot of people. For some people in the military, there is a resistance to do a biopsy. And so we need to depoliticize it, but we also need to educate people. And this is where I think the centers of excellence may come up, that you have centers that are used to evaluating this type of soldier.
Okay, for Dr. Harris. In your experience, has the VA put forward a comprehensive plan to train VA doctors and staff to recognize and properly treat the numerous burn pit-related symptoms?
No. It's a short answer. There is, like somebody said, I think, that one-page thing, but I've never seen that from the VA. I saw that from you. No, I don't think there is. And at our VA, I think we're doing a good job as far as the lung disease goes, but that's been on our initiative in the pulmonary division, not something coming down from, the leadership.
Questions for Will. We've discussed in depth today the medical conditions associated with burn pit exposure. Could you talk a little bit more about the non-medical impacts that veterans experience, the impact on family, ability to work, and so forth?
Well, when I returned home in 2010, I immediately got orders to go to Walter Reed right after my diagnosis of hypersensitivity pneumonitis and pulmonary fibrosis. So with that, I used to be a nurse. I was a combat medic in my unit, and then I was a 68 Mike, which is a nurse. And with this disease that I had, I was immune compromised. I could not go back to work as a nurse. And with my family, my kids can tell you when they say, "Hey, Dad, just like I said in my statement, let's go outside and build a snowman." I can't go outside when it's cold because I have bronchospasms. Or when they say, "Hey, Dad, let's go to a buffet because it's it's good food." I can't go to a buffet. I can't shake hands, as some people realize today. I do fist bumps because shaking hands can cause me to get sick because this is the dirtiest thing on your body right here. It causes a lot of illnesses. So I don't shake hands. I don't hug as much as I want to because my kids don't know if they can hug me or not because they go to school. And everybody knows if you got kids in school, they carry illness and sickness. Snotty noses coughs. And with my kids and my family, my wife has had to go to 0 hours at her job as an RN because she has to take care of me. I forget some of my medicine sometimes, so she has to be there to make sure I take my medicine. Right now I'm on 35 pills a day. I take about 18 to 19 in the morning and then the rest in the evening. I'm on 2 breathing treatments. I have an inhaler. I have a nasal spray that I have to do. I have a big bottle of medicine called Mipron. That's the worst stuff in the world because it's yellow and it won't go away. And my family has to deal with that because they see me every morning pull out these jars. I have a suitcase that carries my medicine. It's not one of them little pill packs. It's a suitcase that I have. So my family has suffered a lot because my kids can't be kids. They can't invite kids over to stay the night if their kids have been sick, or if they've got a cold, or somebody in their family. If you got the flu, you cannot be around me for 21 days. My kids, if they get the flu, they gotta be away from me for 21 days. Or vaccinations, whooping cough, shingles, any live virus vaccinations, I can't be around you for 21 days, per my doctor. So it's affected family life a lot for me, and I know it has for other people, but I know, speaking for me, that it's affected everybody in my family.
This question's for Carrie. Carrie, what would you identify as the biggest obstacle that stands in the way of veterans securing benefits? How could the VA address those obstacles?
I think education on what burn pits are and what they relate to, both on the benefit side and the healthcare side. As the VA doctor just said, the only time she saw the one-page issue from the burn pits training letter was when you gave it to her. So most of the, like I said in my opening statement, most of the claims are denied because of a bad medical opinion, a negative medical opinion, no medical opinion, and physicians are somewhat trained on Gulf War illness, not very much at all, and this is not the same as Gulf War illness. So VA adjudication staff and VA compensation and pension examiners must receive a lot more training on what burn pits are, the magnitude of them, and until that happens, I don't see the claims getting any better unless Congress was to establish presumptions, which is probably a different topic.
Okay, so this question is for Dr. Meehan. We know that toxic inhalation affects the lungs. What other health organs and systems are affected by exposure to toxic chemicals, if any?
Well, as you summarized in your statement, the Institute of Medicine did a review on the data back, it was released in 2011, and the metals and volatile organic compounds and all of those that were in there was very difficult to accurately measure. They are associated with adverse health problems, not only cancer and other multi-system problems, but the particulate matter is so high in Southwest Asia that it made measuring those not very valid. So they came to the conclusion that because the PM levels were so high, and I certainly saw that, my canister would be completely full during a dust storm. I would have had to change it every 4 hours. So we're not getting accurate data simply because the instrumentation was not sensitive enough and the measurement wasn't adequate for us to know really what soldiers were and deployed service members were exposed to over there. But those combustion products from all of those things, including electronics and plastic, hydrocarbons, those are known health hazards, and you're not allowed to do that in the United States. It was because of expediency that was done over there. I personally wouldn't have wanted any of my people blown up taking garbage outside the gate, and I think that we could have done more to get incinerators sooner in the fixed base. That was eventually done, and we need to realize, and as soon as we're doing that, that needs to be monitored right away through the best established method, so we really do know what the levels are. And there's a latency period with these, and so I didn't mention that in my statement, but if you look at known health hazards, whether cigarette smoking, asbestos, beryllium, this can take years before these diseases become manifest. So the VA needs to start tracking this now, deployers, non-deployers, but realize that a good scientific epidemiology study is difficult because you're comparing, there's a reason you didn't deploy when the op tempo was that high back then. So we have what's called the healthy worker bias. So those healthy enough to go to war should have lower disease burden than those that didn't go because they had health problems.
Question for any of the panelists. The current federal burn pit registry doesn't allow families of the fallen to self-report a death entry. How important is it to track the mortality rate of those dying from toxic exposure?
Well, I think it's very important. We're trying to find disease, and disease that causes death would presumably be the most severe disease. So it should absolutely be tracked if we want accurate data.
Carrie, this is for Carrie. The Social Security Administration is already granting compensation for obliterative bronchiolitis due to toxic exposures. How important is it for Congress and the VA to follow suit by amending the Code of Federal Regulations to include constrictive bronchiolitis as a service-connected presumption?
That's probably the easiest route, in my opinion, that Congress or the VA could do. There's a lot of misperception out there. People believe that Congress must act to establish presumptive service connection for disabilities. And basically what that means is you don't need the medical nexus, the medical opinion link between the exposure and the diagnosis if there's a presumptive service connection. You have the exposure, you have the diagnosis, VA will presume it's related, service-connected, and award you benefits. VA can do that on their own. They have general rulemaking authority provided to them by Congress. I don't see that happening. I don't see VA moving at all to make that happen. I'm afraid Congress is probably going to have to do that on their own. VA does, however, have a channel to do it. There are, you heard me mention Gulf War rules and regulations. VA could establish additional regulations under that because that war time period covers most of these veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they could amend that particular portion of the regulation. As far as the evidence goes, when VA establishes regulations based on herbicide exposure in Vietnam, for example, they use a statistical association, which is not a huge burden of proof. It's, as most of the physicians up here can tell you, they've diagnosed constrictive bronchiolitis in almost everybody they biopsy. That so far exceeds, from a benefits perspective, the level in which other wars have resulted in presumptions. There is no reason whatsoever. The evidence is there. VA or Congress, one, should establish presumptive service connection, at the very least, for these lung conditions.
That's very helpful, thank you. So we've switched moderators back out here. Thank you so much to Rosie Torres for being a friend and partner in this. So we actually want to open it up to audience questions now. If you have some questions for the panelists, now is the time. And just put your hand up and we'll recognize you, and then my colleague here is going to bring you a microphone. Okay. And please, if you can just say what office you're from and or what affiliation. Yeah.
Okay, I'm a reserve component service member, and so my question actually is for Will. How long after you redeployed were you referred to the Winter Warrior Brigade?
We got back, I went to, thank you. We redeployed back to Fort Stewart, Georgia for demo, and that was in January. And by April 14th, I had orders to report to Walter Reed.
Okay, so I was wondering because I found that in most cases with a lot of the component service members, they actually should be referred to the Winter Warrior Brigade faster. It's becoming more difficult for reserve component service members to do that. And so in a lot of cases, service members who do eventually get to the VA are actually eligible for care at an active duty facility, but it's difficult to get the Department of Defense to enforce that. So if we presume service connection for lung-related diseases, it would infer that they're eligible for line of duty documentation, which in most cases would make them eligible for medical retirement, which would open up a lot more benefits for them. So, because I noticed that a lot of the research that's done at Walter Reed is only available to service members who are on active duty orders or who are active duty. So that leaves out a lot of reservists who deploy multiple times.
Any comments to that?
I actually got lucky.
I know you did.
Yeah, I actually got lucky because we showed up at Walter Reed with no appointment whatsoever, and we walked up on the pulmonary floor, and I gave the lady at the front desk my papers, and it just so happened that Dr. Collins, he's Lieutenant Colonel now over at Walter Reed, just happened to have somebody not show up, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll see him." And then that right there, Dr. Collins saved me, because if not, then who knows where I'd end up.
Right, because what actually was supposed to happen is when you report that you were sick, the order was supposed to change, you were supposed to be immediately sent to the community.
Well, they thought I had pneumonia when I redeployed, so they didn't pick me.
But even with pneumonia, because you still had an illness that manifested on deployment when you were orders, the policy is that you should remove and refer.
Well,
We're
lady-
finding that a lot of reserve component service members are not getting that opportunity.
Me and the doctor from Ford Stewart, we had several words,
Hmm.
and some heated words, and finally I just gave up on her, and I said, forget about it, I'll take care of it myself.
That is usually the case, and also on your case where they should be retired. You actually are supposed to be eligible for independent living through VA, but if you don't know the policy, and that would give you an opportunity to address some of the other breathing issues that you're having, especially with housing medication. But again, if you don't know the
Right.
policy, or VA doesn't.
Well, I felt that Fort Eustis was trying to push me out before my lung transplant. I mean, that's just how personally I felt, is that I was being rushed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of good issues implicated there. Right up here in the front, let's do you first and then you. And we can take both questions together. Let's do you and then you.
Thank you, Rosie, appreciate it. I'm Anthony Hardy, Director of Veterans for Common Sense. I'm a Gulf War veteran. I just testified last week about Gulf War claims and the 87% denial rate of Gulf War illness claims. Mr. Baker, appreciate, it's good to see you. Appreciate the comments you made about that these are not Gulf War claims, and even if they were Gulf War claims, that's certainly not the solution, because we're battling that issue as well. I'm also an affected Gulf War veteran. I'm quoted for several pages in Joseph Hickman's Burn Pits book. Really appreciate the work, Rose, that you all are doing. I'm also a consumer reviewer for the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. It's treatment focused on Gulf War illness research. It's called the GWIRP, the Gulf War Illness Research Program. I know that Dr. Miller, you and others have applied for funding under that program. I chair the programmatic panel. I'm also aware that under the peer-reviewed medical research program that some of the staffers here in the room work on for appropriating funds for, that there are two topic areas that are specifically of interest. One is the Burn Pits Exposure Program, which we helped to fight at Veterans for Common Sense to ensure that was re-included, but also constrictive bronchiolitis funding program. So I wanted to make those statements. I'm happy to, we know how to work these through Congress to get funding for these research programs that are, our case is treatment focused, but some of, I think, what you've got going on are also other areas. So we're happy to work with anybody here to try and help on those areas to recreate the wheel, but also I would just like to ask whether any of the clinicians on the panel, whether you've had any success in applying for funding under those other programs, the Burn Pits Exposure Program or the Constrictive Bronchiolitis Program at CDMRP specifically, also at VA, and if you've applied for those programs, if you've had any success in, or what it's been like for applying for funding under those programs, or whether you feel that perhaps more is needed. Thank you. That's a little wordy, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Well, I'll respond as far as some DoD grant funding. So we have received 2 DoD grants at National Jewish specifically to address this in collaboration with Bob Miller at Vanderbilt looking at histology. That was the smaller grant. And then we did receive one of the congressionally directed peer-reviewed research programs that we're using now to do a 5-year project to understand mechanisms of airway injury. So we appreciate the support for that, and especially the areas that are for warfighters, because some of the diseases listed on there, they're not directly related to combat veterans and people that are dealing with war injuries. So there's only so much money to go around, so appreciate that.
Yeah, we need to talk, because I was unaware of the constrictive bronchiolitis part. I filed a letter of intent for the Gulf War part, and my patients weren't the right patients, and so, but I have a translational project that I want to start and need funding, so if you could point me the right way, I'd appreciate it.
Be happy to speak, and that's a really important point, because the Gulf War program, they're all very specific, and the Gulf War program is specifically oriented towards 1991 Gulf War veterans dealing with Gulf War illness, and so regrettably, of course, you're denied and for that, and you're steered towards these other programs that exist. They're not well known, they're not well funded. Candidly, I mean, I'll answer my own question. I think there's a lot more that could be done, and I think there's a lot of people in this room that could really help to make that happen.
Thank you. Do we have another question up front here? Yeah, great.
Hi, I'm Bernie Edelman with Vietnam Veterans of America. I work with Rick Wyden. I've been told that the sands in Iraq specifically are like talcum powder. This really is for Dr. Meehan. How complicit is the sand in causing diseases like constrictive bronchiolitis?
Well, the fact that we're seeing this in patients that were not stationed near burn pits, we think that that is a risk factor. So it's not just burn pits that can cause airway injury, airway problems. However, since the very small particle, the 2.5 micron, get into the very terminal airway, that can entrain any of these toxic substances as well. That has to be cleared by the body's immune system. So it's an additional two-hit risk factor to have both very high PM 2.5, 10 micron sized particles that you inhale, plus any emissions that are combat related, industrial related, burn pit related.
Thank you, Dr. Meehan. Before we continue, I want to be sure to recognize Congresswoman Esty. She is the one of the lead sponsors of the Protecting Veterans Exposed to Burn Pits Act in the House. She's been a real champion on this issue, and she graciously co-sponsored this event, so I want to let her say a few words. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Elizabeth Esty. I represent Connecticut's 5th District, home to many veterans, including some big champions nationally, Mike Zakay and others who have really drawn attention to this issue. I serve on the Veterans Committee, and I'm the ranking member on the Disability Appeals and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee. So we see these appeals coming through, and we are trying to learn the lessons of Vietnam and Agent Orange and not make these same mistakes again, and own up to what has actually been happening to our veterans. So I want to thank Burn Pits 360, Amnesty International, our experts here, and most particularly the veterans here on the panel, family members, and in the audience, for your advocacy to make sure that the government does the right thing, that we in Congress allocate those funds, hold people accountable, and get, most importantly, folks, the treatment and care that they need and deserve. So again, I want to thank you for what you are doing. Apologize for the exposure you received, and particularly for denials of benefits you may have had. Denials that you were actually exposed to this, and I know that's happened to people, and it's wrong. You're putting your lives on the line, defending this country, and the last thing you should do is have to fight to get care when you come home. So again, I really want to thank you. It's such an important issue, not just for our veterans and those who are serving, for the aid workers who are there, and for everybody who lives in the communities, for local folks who are also being exposed to these agents. So again, it's an important issue for us to own up to, and frankly, to not only do right, but it's part of the cost of war. We send people into harm's way. You have to think about the whole person, their whole life, their families, and what that impact is. So again, to all of you, I really appreciate your passion and commitment, and please reach out to us. Let us know how we can effectively advocate for you, what we can do to try to make things right going forward, and to try to make sure that it gets baked into procedures going forward, that we don't wait 20 years to correct wrongs. So again, thank you for your work. Again, we have a series of votes going on, so I apologize. I suspect Senator Klobuchar also, that they're doing what's called votorama in the Senate. So there's endless, and they're probably going to be there all night. We were here till 11:30 last night on the House side, so if people are looking a little tired, that would be why. But not too tired than to champion for you, because you've been very encouraging. Please allow us to help shoulder it a little bit with you. Thanks very much.
Okay, so we've got a couple more questions.
Yeah, there's one in the back.
Okay, great. There's one in the back. Can we go ahead and recognize that person?
Hi, I'm Mel Collins, and I'm the spouse of retired chaplain Colonel Collins. He spent 48 months in combat. We actually are going to go to Jewish next week to see Dr. Rose and Dr. Ming. And one of my concerns is I've heard so many conflicting stories regarding the biopsies. Is it harmful to him? Will it lessen his life? We already know we're going to have a short life. I don't want to shorten it even more. It's number one, he has 18 medications that he takes right now. And most of the ones for his lungs do not work. Is there an alternative to that?
Well, I can just tell you what will happen is that he'll be evaluated by a multidisciplinary team. That'll be occupational pulmonologist, will be all the radiologists, we'll have a conference, pathologists review any tissue, all the blood work, all the physiology, and then the doctors will say whether we feel that that will aid in his diagnostic clarity to do a VATS biopsy. The surgeon that we use does this all the time, and so I've certainly not seen any complication from a VATS biopsy done at National Jewish. Dr. Miller has more experience. He's done actually more VATS biopsies than we have, so I'll let him answer that as well.
You know, it's a complicated issue, because when I talk to patients about a biopsy, I tell them that I'm suspicious that you may have constrictive bronchiolitis, but making that diagnosis doesn't lead to change in therapy. And I also tell them that making that diagnosis frequently will not affect your disability rating. And that for a lot of people, having the biopsy is a matter of peace of mind. That now I know why I'm short of breath. And you know, many people would consider that a very controversial decision to make, that I'm having a biopsy just so I can know for sure what I'm dealing with. But you have to weigh it, and it's a very individual decision. You know, we've had over 100 without any serious complications, but we've also selected patients that we consider to be low risk. And I've deferred biopsy on a lot of people because I feel like that they've got too many other conditions that might increase the risk. So it's a very individual decision, and you have to understand what the biopsy will get you.
And that's where we're at right now. We already know he was exposed to so many chemicals, including sarin. And so we worry that, I mean, we've got 5 children, 28, 25, 29, and 5. So we would like to keep him longer, and if opening up his lungs is going to cause him to have more problems, you know, that was one of our biggest concerns. So, and it took us 4 years to get an appointment with you. 4 years to try and see you, and actually I went through a back door to see you. So the VA has nothing to do with my appointment with, you know, Dr. Rose. And so, you know, how is this going to make it easier for our members to see pulmonologists? How easy is it going to be to get us some care? You know, and how many lives are we going to let go because we're waiting on Congress to take action? They don't have to worry about it. They don't have our medical care. They could care less sometimes, but I wish they would.
And that's one issue that I did bring to Representative Kaufman, that there's a VA choice. And if you're not doing well in the VA system and you need specialty care, you have the right to be seen outside that. That's not being encouraged, I know, and because of all the issues
Come
that
to
you
New Mexico and let the Albuquerque VA know that, and educate, empower, and inform what we are allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do.
And this is, I think, something only Congress can put pressure on leadership of the VA to facilitate.
Thank you all. Thank you. That's a really great transition. So we're out of time here, but I just want to review. Thank you for all of you who came from congressional offices. Amnesty International, USA, and Blowpits 360 have encouraged the congressional office to urge for a hearing. We can continue to have this conversation in front of the lawmakers so they can take testimony, investigate further to support legislative efforts that will increase the access to specialized health care and benefits, and also to put that pressure on the VA to issue those guidelines, to give that guidance and to recognize the service connection of these devastating health consequences that veterans are facing. So we urge all of you to take that back to your bosses and share the information that you've learned here in your packets. There's an issue brief that gives a full rundown of the asks that we have for Congress. So it's our hope that this is just the first of a long conversation on how we can address this crisis together. Thank you very much for coming.